All right, I think we have a good sized group. We can go ahead and begin. Again, if anybody wants to, we really want to welcome everyone to participate in this talk. So now or later at any point, please feel welcome to turn on your camera, unmute yourselves, say hello. We'd really love to see your faces and get to kind of hang out together this afternoon. So hi Naja, nice to see you. Bold
What's up?
Turn your camera on. All right. So hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. As I was telling Martin while people were logging in, it was a really beautiful day here in Miami, and we're really so happy to be able to create this virtual space and share it with people, not just here, but in Berlin, where Martin is based, and elsewhere around the world. For those of you who don't know me yet, I'm Monica from Locust Projects. Locust Projects is, of course, Miami's longest running nonprofit alternative art space. We're an arts incubator, and we give space and money and other support to visionary artists so they can experiment, take risks, and make cool things happen. Our latest cool thing is, of course, a beautiful installation by a truly, and I don't want to embarrass you, Giovanna, but a truly bold and visionary artist, Giovanna Gonzalez, who some of you know. The exhibition is called How to Oh Look at Me, and it closes today. So if you're in Miami and you haven't had a chance yet to check it out, you can still catch it after this talk until 5 o'clock. It's a really beautiful show, and yeah, if you haven't had a chance to make it, today's the day. How to Look at Me is the 5th iteration of the How To series, in which Giovanna creates works of art to accompany poems featured in an online open source poetry collective by Berlin-based writer Martin Jackson, who's here with us today, and you'll hear more from. They'll both tell you more about their longtime collaboration, their past iterations, and how this project came to be. All right, as I mentioned before, I'm just letting a few more people in. As I mentioned before, this conversation is participatory, which means we want you to participate as much as you want to. So again, feel free to turn on your cameras, say hello, unmute yourselves, chime in. We also have a Google Doc of the presentation outline, which we've dropped in the chat window. We emailed it to some of you this morning. We dropped it in the chat window, and we'll continue to drop it throughout the talk. If you want to and you're comfortable doing so, please feel welcome to sign into your Google account, open the Google Doc, and you can add your comments and questions right in the Google Doc, which will help steer the course of Gio and Martin's talk in real time. You can toggle between your web browser and your Zoom window, comment, and add your questions in the Google Doc and participate with us that way. If you don't know what any of that means, or that sounds confusing or overwhelming, don't worry. You're welcome to just watch the talk on Zoom, add your comments and questions in the chat window, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can throughout the talk. All right, so that's basically it for me. Just quickly, I would like to thank the other organizations that helped make Giovanna's show happen. Our friends at Ulite Arts, Diaspora Vibe Cultural Arts Incubator, and Pulp Arts. We're always so happy to collaborate with them in supporting great work like this. And thank you all again for being here. Again, we would love to see your faces. Say hi anytime. Drop your questions in the chat or the Google Doc, and we'll take it from there. So I'm going to turn things over to you, Gio and Martin, if you're ready.
Cool. Thank you, Monica, and thank you everyone for being here. I am really excited to kind of share with you guys how this project came to be, and also give some more insight on mine and Martin's long-term collaboration on various different projects as well. Martin, if you want to scroll to the first page. So Martin and I have known each other for 8 years now. We met back in Berlin. We happened to move there at the same time, and both ended up working at this really funny cafe for probably about a year. And Martin was a barista and I did the baking. So in this, it was a really interesting time where there was a bunch of people that had worked there that were also creatives, and just kind of figuring things out. One of the other people as well that worked at the same place, her name is Eva Gonzalez. Eva and I started a reading group, like co-founded a reading group called Read What You Want, that then Martin also became a part of and a main collaborator for. In this first page, we just kind of are sharing some photos that we found of us like back in the day, doing some of these events, traveling together, just hanging out. And yeah, it's just been a very long, fruitful journey for the both of us. And that also, working on Read What You Want has led into us doing a variety of different collaborations together. One being a part of this show as well. Martin, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. Hello, everyone. It's great to see some familiar names and faces in the meeting so far. And yeah, thank you to Monica and Jordan and Locust for inviting me and for setting all this up. It's been a great process. Just very quickly, for those who don't know me, I'm a writer of fiction and poetry based in Berlin from the UK. And I also, one of the things I love to do as well is aside from hiding on my little kind of cave here and writing fiction and poetry, is also collaborating with artists. So artists like Giovanna, Monica, who's also in this chat. Like, I write exhibition texts. I work with artists on what a show is about, on some conceptual stuff. Yeah, really love kind of collaborating with people, sharing, learning from them, and hoping that I can help them as well with some kind of word-based stuff. Yeah, it's one of the things that I've really enjoyed since moving to Berlin about 8 years ago. And yeah, I guess it all kicked off with working with Geo when we met about 8 years ago. That's it. That's us. That's who we are. Just, I guess one more thing on the Google Doc. It's pretty funny for us working in this Google Doc, because this is how, obviously, Geo's mostly in Miami. I'm mostly in Berlin. So we spend a lot of time in this environment. We spend a lot of time in Google Docs, commenting, sharing, arguing, deleting, editing, copy paste, copy paste, copy paste. So it's pretty cool. We thought it'd be really nice to kind of invite you into this environment, to kind of share our minds where they spend so much time. So that's intros. As Geo said, I think as Monica said as well, the show that's currently on at Locust, along with, I think, 4 previous shows that Geo's worked on, Geo's created, come from this open source online poetry collection that I created about, I think it's like 4 years ago. I got some funding from a body called the International Literature Showcase, and they supported me kind of like bringing this to the world. And what it is, most simply, is this. It's a kind of poetry collection homed in a Google Doc. And I had like maybe 3 reasons or 3 core reasons for doing this. The first one is just, as you can see on the right here, is all these kind of like commenters and collaborators and people, kind of writers and artists from all around the world. And I like this idea of making a poetry collection collaborative, because normally it's such a solo or kind of like an insular kind of project. So that was the first one, was like inviting people to edit, inviting people to comment, inviting people to tell me, which they sometimes did, that they didn't understand something or didn't like something. That's the first reason. I think the second reason is, I like, in a lot of my work, I like to kind of infiltrate or to kind of like occupy or change or like draw attention to things. So I've done projects before on Google Maps, and this one was about kind of taking what is basically a work tool, a tool of capital, a tool of industry, Google Docs, and saying that actually, this can be used for poetry, this can be used for art, this can be used for collaboration. So that was fun. And then the third thing that I think this does is also is a bit of infiltration, which is it uses as the source material for the poetry what are called like automatic transcriptions from YouTube. So some people know this, some people don't, but when you go to any YouTube video, or when you upload any YouTube video, YouTube's algorithms kind of like listen and process any spoken elements into captions. So if I just hit this little thing here, you see it says English auto-generated. Now that means that, but basically what is happening here is Google is using all of our billions and billions and billions of hours of footage to train its AIs, our future overlords. And so it's using kind of YouTube footage to do this, to train its AIs to recognize human speech. One of the things I noticed is that, especially a few years ago, this wasn't particularly accurate, especially if you weren't, for example, surprise, surprise, a kind of Western English speaking, clearly spoken person, then a lot of the translations were inaccurate or strange or sometimes funny, sometimes interesting. So in order to create this project, what I did was find topics that I was into, for example, quantum mechanics, and then find 10, 20, 30 videos and just kind of use a bit of code to kind of parse out the automatic transcriptions, which you can kind of see over here. And then after that, I get to a point where I have a document like this, which is like maybe 15 pages of like raw material. I thought of this as, and then from this I then collage and cut and cut and cut and cut and cut and cut until we have a poem. So that's the process. That's what tutorials is all about. And I guess not long into the project, I showed it to Geo and said, like, hey, like, what do you think about this? And you can see here, 14th of June, 2017, Geo was dropping in some comments. And I think that was the kind of the spark for Geo's mind, I think. I remember at some point, probably in a bar somewhere, she came to me, she's like, hey, yo, I'm gonna translate all your poems in this thing into installations and sculptures. I was like, no, you're not. But we're now 5, so I think 5 of these, maybe 30 so poems have been turned into turned into installations and sculptures. So she seemed to have been telling the truth, which has been pretty wild for me. It's been pretty wild for this strange poetry project's tutorials to turn it into Geo's how-to series. Yeah, Geo, did you want to chat about
definitely
from your point of view?
Yeah, so like how Martin mentioned, I got super inspired in how this whole process was working, this idea of like miscommunication or translation. And I thought, well, it would be interesting if just taking it to a whole nother medium, like what if we can create these into visual translations and what that would mean. And so what I felt was kind of necessary or interesting to kind of stay true to the project to a certain extent of what Martin had already started was I created these like ground rules where Martin and I wouldn't talk about what the poem meant or how he got there beforehand until after I've already created a visual translation. And so he agreed and thought it was like a good way of approaching it. So his project is called Tutorials, mine is called How To. So I think that's like kind of a playful and silly way that we also are always collaborating and in this way communicating with one another through these various different outlets. So then it allowed me to kind of translate the poems without having any of these like preconceived notions or understanding of where they came from. And a lot of the poems are open-ended and are kind of, there's so many different ways that you can interpret it. And I found that also really interesting because it's not sort of super straightforward. And so my visual translations also aren't like a direct replica of word for word of what you're seeing, but more of what I took away from it. So I just wanted to show a few examples of how those have kind of come out. A few past examples, we also included some hyperlinks of the poems that they came from. So this document is, will be accessible for everybody who has logged into it. So you can take some time to look at that on your own time. And it was very ambitious of me to kind of say that I would translate all the poems. I am on the 5th iteration, which is currently being shown at Locust Projects. And Martin, how many poems total do you have?
There's like 30. So I don't know. You got a long career ahead of you. I think
so.
You're
Maybe
gonna make
when I'm like 80 years old, we'll be done.
Yeah.
There was like at some point, Martin told me that he was thinking about deleting the whole project, and I was like, you can't do that. He has a tendency to just delete his project after a few years.
When it's done, it's done. That's it. Delete
Yeah.
it, burn it.
So, but I'm not done. So we have to. Hopefully, we can keep it going.
I know. I've got to renew that URL license every year. It's like $49 every year. Just renew it. Just
yeah, it's worth it. So yeah, it's been a really exciting kind of way of working. I think probably one of the interesting aspects of it as well for the both of us is being able to have that conversation afterwards, where Martin tells me how he arrived to that poem and the sources and all of that, like what YouTube videos he was pulling from. And a lot of times I'm not like completely aligned. And that's the point, it isn't, in a lot of ways is that it's not that I'm supposed to, there's no right or wrong, I guess. And so with that has basically, like now led what is currently being shown at Locust, which is called How to Oh Look at Me. Oh Look at Me, Oh Look at Me is a line in the poem called No Rothko. And No Rothko is the poem that the whole exhibition is based on. I'll let Martin kind of introduce what this poem is and how he got there.
Yeah, so this is I guess what I like about this process is what I'm going to say now is Geo would definitely not want to know beforehand. So in this process, in this collaboration, you would kind of read the poem and just get what you could out of it, and then go and then translate that. But then afterwards we have the discussion. So the discussion was something like this. So in my trawling of YouTube, looking for source material and like I said, finding all these different videos about different topics, I found this footage, which is like just the aesthetics are amazing.
But it hasn't any knowledge of the language at all.
So this is like the Scranton Public Library poetry
Sometimes
series.
the translations are cryptic in themselves.
And this is a poet called William Bronk, a pretty reclusive poet during his life. Didn't have any fame, didn't chase any fame. And I found basically like an hour's worth of footage of him reading his poems from this series. Pulled out the transcriptions, so kind of using this kind of like scraping method, pulled it out, and as I showed you before, ended up with all of these kind of like bits of language, some of which were transcribed accurately, some of which were strange, and then slowly just kind of like, I think you can see on page 1, slowly just kind of like pulled it down until this is like an older version. So he says something kind of at the start like, "Am I amplified back there? We need the mic for the permanent record." So this didn't make it into the final cut of the poem, but you can kind of see where it came from the man himself. And then the poem, the No Rothko poem is, you can see it here, but I'll read it as well. Somebody said to me during the intermission that I remind her of a Rothko painting, which surprised me. It surprised me that, appealing as he is, us being there in that paint of his, by not being there, that no, I don't have any poems about any Rothkos. Some of us paint to grope in the dark, I tell her. Not one of us sees anything. Listen, not one thing is there. We are, all of us, edgeless and senseless. Look at me. Oh, look at me. We have to start now. So I guess my hope here was that it had this kind of sense of the voice of Bronk reading this, and also like I guess I like as well the this idea of just kind of probing at what it is that painting is, what it is that art is, and what it is that we see in looking at works like Rothko, those kind of works that you kind of fall into. So then Gio told me then this was the poem that she wanted to work on. We then did what we always do, which was create a Google Doc that, like most of our Google Docs, probably became about 50 pages long. And one decision we made, which I think was a really good one, was for this show, rather than just having like a flat single side A4 press text, gallery text, call it what you like, we actually decided to make a booklet because we had so many ideas, and we kind of like the idea of inviting the kind of viewer, the reader into this booklet rather than just a kind of flat kind of printout, A4 printout. So this is also linked to in the Google Doc. So feel free to kind of download this. You can see it has the poem in there. It has some kind of ideas on translation that we'll go into. And then at the very end, it has a kind of response, which I'll also talk about now. So yeah, as you can see the little link to the booklet there. Feel free to download that. A couple of quotes that we've pulled. Yeah.
Yeah, quick question. So we're talking about how the poems, Giovanna takes these poems and translates them into works of art. And before we move forward, if you scroll up in the Google Doc a little bit, there's a question. I think it's directed at Giovanna. Do you consider these physical works poems also?
Yeah, I think that's a really good interpretation into the work. 100%. I think the visual works are also very poetic. They're just more three-dimensional or creating spaces versus words.
All right, cool.
Cool.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to catch that question before we move forward.
Cool.
Thank you.
So there's a nice, I really like this quote, which is in the booklet from Adrian Rich, which is: the study of the manipulation processes of literature as exemplified by translation can help us towards a greater awareness of the world in which we live. Ooh, love it. Look at that. Two lines, and it does a whole lot. And I love this idea of like manipulation. I think the root of manipulation has this idea of like kind of like digging and using your hands and kind of like changing things, morphing things. Yeah, exemplified by translation can help us towards a greater awareness of the world. And I love this. I think there's something really nice about translation being not just an invisible process. So not just something that transforms, for example, a French text into an English text or a poem into an installation. That actually, if you look at the process, think about the process itself, that the process itself can be as interesting as the thing at the start and the thing at the end. And I think that's one of the things that Gio and I really got into in this project, with this idea of, yeah, the idea of the process, the idea not just of the finished object, but of the bit in between. And I think that's really good. And then just in this box here, so I think this was just a section from our Google Doc that we were just, I think Gio, you were just like riffing at some point, right? And you were just thinking about what. Yeah, can you explain where this text came from? Do you remember where this text came from? This is this one.
Yeah, so this is like more of my kind of interpretation of the poem, No Rothko, and what I was thinking about. And like Martin mentioned, this was like more of me just like free writing in the Google Doc, you know, like what my thoughts were around that. And I was really, at first I thought, you know, like the poem was really about Rothko. And then in the end, I realized as I sat with it more and more, that I felt like it wasn't, but it was more about how is it that we're experiencing things? How is it that we are communicating with one another? What it means to really look at something, you know, and how that's maybe embedded in a lot of preconceived notions. And then that really like opened up into, you know, because of the fact that our world today is, you know, we don't have this separation between online and offline, but it's really a mesh at this point. At least I think so. And so kind of incorporating then that experience as well into it. And the poem is talking a lot about this experience of looking at art. So this is sort of where that stemmed from. And we felt like Martin and I, like when putting together the booklet, that it was a nice way to kind of end, you know, with this thought. So start with his poem and then this ending thought that's kind of like the final closing for us. And I think it gives, when I give tours at Locust, I always give this booklet to people. It's available there, and tell them to start here, and then we can kind of enter into the space.
Yeah, I like that. I think there's something really nice about this idea of the space, right? Creating this space, because obviously your installation is a very 3D like thing. It occupies a space. You can walk around it, you can walk on it, you can play with it, you can do all those things. And I like that. I like that idea of like, yeah, they're creating this space, which the booklet also helps to do, right? The booklet creates a mental kind of environment, a mental kind of like space for us to kind of step into. Yeah, I'll read this. I like this text. It's like a good snapshot of Gio's brain. Artwork as backdrop, pixelated proofs that I was there. I was living my best. Experience validated. It actually happened. It happened to me. Do you see me? If others don't see you looking, did you see? Imagine every one of the photos of a single exhibition collaged and spliced into a 3D sphere. The radical sanctity of no camera spaces. Berghain in Berlin, the Rothko Chapel. We need more sacred spaces. We are, all of us, edgeless and senseless. Oh, look at you. Big camera flip there. Whoosh. Look at you. No, but I like this. I think at some point, I remember like some early chats about the project, you were thinking about incorporating, is it that you incorporating cameras or CCTV or like really kind of like playing on this idea of like observation and like whatever. I think the idea of like people like Instagramming stuff and using art as a backdrop. Do you remember that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was like early on thinking about the installation itself, but then was just like surveillance is such a heavy and large topic all in itself. So putting the cameras in there is weighted. So I decided not to, because I don't think that this poem is about surveillance. So this venture, there was a lot of moments, as always in the process of creating work. As many of you know, like there's a lot of adding and deleting constantly. And so that was definitely one thing that like a thought that came through. And as Martin and I always do, it's a very long, lengthy, us just talking crap to each other in a Google Doc, arguing whether or not like, trying to defend our point of view about a concept. I
love, Giovanna, that you kind of ended with the idea of like no cameras at all, right? Because I mean, in a similar way to how you were saying that the conflation between sort of our URL space and our in real life space, right? That's getting more and more blurred. I think there are so few spaces these days where we're not surveilled, where we're not potentially, in someone's Instagram live story or a number of other ways of capturing imagery. So I think that feels really freeing to walk into the space and be like, cover your camera, put your phone away, and just be here.
Yeah.
It feels really freeing and safe. So I think that was a really cool conclusion to come to in that process.
I mean, it made a lot of sense, especially, like in this, what Martin just read in this last kind of like thought of mine, within our conversation is like thinking about what are these spaces where they're spaces of sanctuary. So, the Rothko Chapel is one, and actually in the Rothko Chapel, you're not allowed to take photos. And then Berghain, which Berghain, if some of you don't know, is a very well-known queer techno club in Berlin, and has, it's like one of the best clubs that people come to and travel to all around the world. And in this space, as in many queer spaces, specifically in Berlin, no cameras, not allowing cameras or photos in the space is a known thing. So I wanted to like embody that as well, even for this show, and think about creating a sort of place of contemplation, a place to be present, and in this booklet, if you go back and you read it, we talk about, being in first person, like how often are we actually really present with ourselves? And I think if you ask yourself that, you realize it's not that often. So what it meant to take this moment in time within the space that I've created, and maybe even you can take that with yourself after this experience, right? And really kind of think about intentionally of like, why is it that we feel so compelled all the time to snap a photo for every single second. And then I think, you know, a lot of that is kind of embedded now through this idea of validation, right? So it's like, even outside of looking at art, you know, people go traveling and they go traveling to take a photo in front of the very iconic thing or whatever, because it shows proof that you were there. So what if you don't have this quote unquote proof? What does that mean? Does that mean that you never existed, that you never actually were, you never did anything? And I found that really fascinating, you know? So there's this constant maybe like duality that ended up being developed through the work as well. And in the end of this, you know, last text, I'll just say one thing. You know, the end of it, here you can see there's a line that's also the same in the No Rothko poem, but then in the No Rothko poem, it says, oh, look at me. And then this ends by saying, oh, look at you. And that also gets revisited again later on, which we'll talk about.
Cool. You want to chat about this? My welding skills are not great, so I can't contribute much.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But so then getting into the actual making of the work, you know, it's for me, you know, being hands-on is such an important element. I really enjoy actually, you know, doing the physical labor and work. So after sort of creating the rendering of, you know, what the overall structure, which is basically the only thing that exists inside of Locust Projects, other than painting the walls and the floor. But this is the only thing that I put in the space, which was, you know, also a tough decision, but something that I felt like I needed to stick to, you know, it was an original idea. So anyways, kind of giving insight or some, you know, imagery of me working on it. This first photo is me and also like the team at Pulp Arts that I created the work at, starting to bend and fold the benches. So if you've seen the show already, you'll know they're all the benches inside the structure. But those benches were, you know, we created a template, I designed it, and then they're all hand bent and welded onto the structure. So just wanted to kind of show people, I think a lot of people assume that I didn't make it either. So yeah, and that was great. You know, it's interesting to think how much time has passed, especially, you know, because of COVID, of course, but from the start of me, you know, drawing and starting to sketch and write about this project to submitting it to Locust Projects for an exhibition, that was 3 years ago. So it's, you know, a whole kind of year of just working towards the production side, fabricating it. I spent like, you know, several months in Gainesville to make this work. And then thinking about, you know, where things have, you know, led to now. And the video is one of those things, but, you know, 3 years kind of went into the development of this project, which is pretty crazy.
That is crazy. And I love that you included this in your presentation because, you know, I think that one way to think about what artists do is they make the invisible visible. And I feel like this is very like multiple layers of that, where you take something that's this like collaborative poem, which is maybe, you know, very intellectual, very emotional. You take these thoughts and feelings and perspectives, translate them into words, and then create a physical form, right? So it's like, I mean, it's everything that you're talking about, but I just feel like this part is such a key aspect in seeing the hands-on labor. It really, yeah, adds a whole other dimension.
Yeah, definitely. That's where like a lot of the fun is, of course.
And
I find it cool. Like I guess.
Skills.
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I guess before I moved to Berlin was like a kind of art world amateur, right? I didn't have a clue like what artists did, how they did it, etc. and so on. I think one of the cool things about collaborating with you, Gio, has been like realizing that, like, obviously not saying for every artist, but realizing like how many artists just know how to do so many super cool and hard things. I remember when you told me, it's like, oh, I'm learning to weld. It's like, cool, like I had a walk today, it's pretty, and I kind of like this idea, like the artist, like just accumulating skills. So like there's the 20-year-old art school student that knows like X and Y, and maybe like how to stretch a canvas and build a frame and do whatever. And then there's a 30-year-old, and there's a 40-year-old, and there's a 50-year-old. And I just love this idea of like this accumulation of, because like you can now weld. You couldn't weld, you taught yourself to weld, and now you can weld. And I just kind of love this idea of like the artist like strapping on superpowers and like strapping on these like tools and whatever. And it's been a really good insight for me, like working with people like you and just seeing, just seeing these kind of like this accumulation of magic powers. It's pretty good. You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Cool. Well, I think one of the things and one of the exciting kind of aspects as well, and it's also embedded into Martin's project, is that this thing is never finished and it's always open, and there's always room to elaborate and rework. And I think I wanted just to show a few examples of how that same kind of thought process is utilized within like the visual translations that I'm creating. So on the exterior window of Locust Projects, there's this large vinyl that I designed that also has a line from the No Rothko poem. So when you're driving by or walking by, you can also see it. So that's also, it's a subtle, but yet I think seemingly important element as well to the overall concept and show. And then I didn't stop there. I thought, I wanted to create these t-shirts, and the way that I approached them is I was thinking about creating like concert t-shirts, which I did not put together a concert, but what I did have is that I created a video, and we had, I directed a video, and there was a film premiere at New World Symphony Soundscape Park. And so a part of that, I wanted to create these t-shirts to kind of like encapsulate that this very special moment, not only for myself, but for the team, my crew that worked on the film with me, Martin, and yeah, just, kind of have something as this keeps this sort of like very tangible and accessible, like keep away, like, and because the structure itself is so large, it's not something that is readily accessible necessarily. So on the front of the t-shirt is the No Rothko poem. There's kind of like a small snippet of the rendering of the structure that I created. On the right side of the t-shirt sleeve, it says how to, oh, look at me. And then the left one, it says how to, oh, look at you, which is again playing back into the text in that booklet and that conversation that Martin and I are having, as well as that last like snippet of thought, like that last poem is on the back of the t-shirt. So you're seeing this like thing kind of re-evolve or come back again, but in a different medium or format. So yeah, I created a limited edition and run for the show, and it just gives like some insight as well, I think, into the process. And some of them are still available if anyone is interested.
Mine's on hold, right? You've got what you're holding.
Yours is on hold. Yes, it's on hold.
Yeah.
So yeah, these are just some people that ordered t-shirts, sent me some photos. Just wanted to share that with y'all as well. And I guess we can scroll, Martin.
Yeah. Okay. So this is kind of the final section, and this is where it gets a bit more free, I guess, a bit more open, is because this is an open question for us. This idea of what is translation. So we've seen a couple of examples of it earlier on in the presentation, but we just wanted to take a minute to kind of think about it a bit more. So one of the ideas, one of the concepts we found along the way was this idea of intersemiotic translation, which is at its simplest, at its simplest, just means translating from one medium to another. So in this case, translating from poetry to visual art or installation or sculpture. It could be a famous this idea, I guess it's like a person who hates critics, you know,
Hey, Martin,
the idea
you just broke up a little bit. If you want to just repeat that.
Okay. It just told me my internet connection is unstable. Thanks, Germany. am I back?
I think you're back.
Good.
We're all a little unstable. It's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this idea of intersemiotic translation between one medium and another. And there's a famous quote, which I always forget who it's by, but it's writing about film is like dancing about architecture. And I think the whoever said it was just, you know, sick of the critics, sick of people writing about critiquing film and saying, you know, like, you writing about my film, you might as well dance about that building, which is a kind of negative thing. But I like the positive side of this, which is how much translation can open up a piece, how much translation from one medium to another can transform not just the end piece, but the original piece. I think the poem I wrote, the No Rothko poem, now is very different because of the translation process. And I think there's something very interesting about how different ways that we interact with a thing can change the states, change the being, change the essence of that thing, which is one of the reasons I think, Geo, I've seen this with not just this show here, but there was Play Lay A at the Bass Museum. You have this kind of really nice kind of inclination to kind of bring people in to participate on or in or amongst your sculptures. So I've seen dancers dancing with a sculpture. I've seen poets reading their work from within a sculpture. Did you want to say a bit about that? Do you want to say?
Yeah, so kind of like to elaborate that on a little bit more is, you know, with this project, How to Oh Look at Me, I wanted to kind of stay true to that idea as well. And so I didn't want to just stop at me translating Martin's poem, but also to allow other people, other artists to come in and then translate the space that I've created. So sort of moving even past, you know, the original source, the next one, and so forth, and really seeing how far things can be pushed. And keeping in mind this concept of like this, you know, open source platform, so that it's constantly morphing and changing and can be interpreted in that. It's very open-ended. So there's like a lot of freedom in that. There's a lot of chance for sure, because you don't know what the outcome is going to be. But I find that, you know, very fascinating for me as well. And I think within my overall practice, I'm not interested in it just being my voice. I think the ideas that I'm working around are shared thoughts and ideas. And so I want to bring those people in as well. So for this particular work, originally before COVID, it was supposed to be a live performance inside of Locust with the structure. And, you know, a few months into the pandemic and everything, I had tried to do, when people started to slowly think about doing some small programmings and everything, I maybe tried to do one or two like different, very small, intimate performances. But I wasn't necessarily satisfied with the outcome, mostly just because it became very exclusive in terms of the audience, in terms of how many people are able to come and participate and everything. And I felt like that took away, it's everything that I don't want to happen within the work that I'm creating. And so over kind of a long period of time of thinking, okay, like what else can I do? Like what other medium can I utilize? Like how can I still embody the same sort of feeling that I think performance really carries? And I think that's like intimacy, there's like the proximity, it brings the work really alive. And you know, the one thing that makes performance, I think, really unique is that it's usually an ephemeral experience, right? There's not a lot of mediums that do that. But I also felt that because of this time, you know, that we're living in, that wouldn't be appropriate either, right? There's a lot of folks that haven't felt comfortable even leaving their home or anything, and I wanted to create something that could be readily, you know, accessible and can be shared. So I came to Locust and I was like, you know, I feel like maybe making a film would be an appropriate thing to do. So I've never directed a film before, and I pitched this idea to Locust, and they were super supportive. And yeah, and so then also had some additional, support with that as well, which has been really amazing. There's been Commissioner, that's organization based here in Miami, Ulai Arts, Locust, of course, and then Miami Light Project. So Lori, Locust and Miami Light Project have had a very long-term sort of partnership and relationship with one another, and I think a similar mission in terms of organizations. And so Lori connected me with Miami Light Project, and so they helped support through kind of funneling and navigating the sort of dance world in Miami, because I wanted to invite 2 dancers. So I invited 2 dancers, 2 poets, and 1 musician to come into the space, the installation that I've created, and to create their own translation in their own mediums. And I picked those 3 different mediums specifically because I think that they're all different forms of communication. Not through, the poetry is through words, dance is through movement, and then music through sound. And I had created what is a 3-dimensional space or structure. And that process was really a back and forth. We met constantly, all of us, and sometimes a small group of us, to develop the work. But it was everyone was sort of bouncing off of each other to a certain degree. So in that, then became the preparation for the video. So the 2 poets, they created these poems, original poems for this project itself. Same with the musician, it's an original score, the choreography, etc. So if some of you guys haven't seen it, we're gonna go ahead and share the trailer with you guys. The video is also currently still being played at Locust Projects.
Gio, if I can just chime in for a second about your video and that event at Soundscape Park. I mean, the video is just so beautiful and so powerful. And I do think that, the way that you collaborated is such a fertile space, because it wasn't you coming in and saying, these are my ideas, let's do A, B, C, and D. It was this is the space we have. These are the resources we have. This is what each of you brings to the table. What can we make together? And it becomes this whole, new, beautiful thing. And I think it's important that in your conceptualizing of the video, you prioritized women of color. And I think that that's really meaningful, because when we do give these resources, and give women of color space to lead, they often will bring other people up with them, right? They will create space for other people and give and share those opportunities. And I think it's important to kind of note that and see the value in that. And back to what you were saying about kind of how to activate your exhibition in a way that was conscientious of kind of the pandemic and the state of the world. I think this was for me personally, it was one of the first kind of events that I went to, right? As restrictions kind of started easing up and people started getting vaccinated. And it was just such a beautiful night to be able to be outside in this space that felt safe with other people, to celebrate, to see this beautiful work with these incredibly talented women on screen, like big, bold, loud on Miami Beach. It's just really incredible.
Yeah, it was definitely a very magical moment. The moon came out for us. Everybody was kind of like feeling it, and kind of premiering it at New World Symphony Soundscape Park was my #1 choice. But I'll be honest, I didn't think that it would happen. But I figured, why not just ask and find out? And luckily, it all came together, and received a lot of support to do so. And if you guys have never, people in Miami, never like been to this space, one of the most amazing things about it is not only the projection, because it's such a high quality projection, but that the park itself is surrounded with 155 speakers. So it's like beyond immersive. And so to have that experience, to premiere the work, for the first time in this space, it to be outside so that, it was safe, and it's a massive park. A lot of people were able to come. I really felt like I was able to accomplish that goal that I wanted to achieve. Yeah, it was very special, I think, for all of us. So go for it, Martin.
I'm just conscious of time. We just got like a few minutes of the allotted hour. So I know that some people probably have other plans, but yeah, go on, Gio. Yeah.
So kind of, leading into the end of our presentation, here is finally, if you haven't seen the work at Locust Projects, this is the structure that ended up being created for the No Roscoe poem. And in the structure, there's a variety of different benches, and there's these 2 staircases that lead up to the 2nd level. The whole structure is based off of a grid. And as maybe some of you know, like the infrastructure itself is also, our infrastructure is based off of a grid. Infrastructure online, digitally, is also based off of a grid. So I wanted to use that motif in the work itself. The box or the cube or the grid is also utilized in the film. So when you see the whole film, you'll see that motif reappear over and over again. And I wanted the structure to be pretty open so that you're in an interior and exterior space all at the same time, and allow it to be the space where, even though it's created in such a rigid kind of way, it's open enough that it's free flowing, and you can kind of go in and out and kind of claim it as your own however you wish. So that's kind of a little bit of a quick synopsis of how I got there. And here is the performers, the other artists that are a part of the film, that was mentioned earlier, who was, they were all very, very amazing to work with, and also I know future collaborators as well. And another kind of maybe interesting insider view of how I got to the structure was like I started to look at scaffolding. So I wanted to pull up this this image, this comparison, which I happened after the fact of this sort of photo that we took, but I thought it was a nice kind of comparison, so you can see that connection as well. So now, as we said, we're super happy and would love to hear other people's kind of opinions, questions, insights. Feel free to write directly in the doc, leave a comment, or you can just do it the old school way and unmute yourself.
So there's one question there, Gio, you see that on the screen from Naja about the kind of the different shades of blue, and then from I think probably Jordan on the choices of purple and blues colors.
Yeah, so
real quick, the question is, can you talk about photographing all these shades of blue in terms of perception versus reality? LOL. Also, yes. The choice of these particular shades of blue in general, are they inspired by a specific Rothko painting, etc.?
It's not inspired by a specific Roscoe painting, although there are a lot of blue ones out there. But I will say there's, you know, maybe like subconsciously there's an aspect of that as well, because in the beginning I was doing a lot of kind of research or diving into his paintings. But I think more specifically in this, you know, kind of thought of creating a sort of sanctuary or meditative space, and I think a space without clutter. You know, I bounced a lot around with different possibilities for color, but where I ended up was in this hue of blue, which is kind of more of like a muted pastel blue. And then I wanted to play around with like kind of the perception of color in the space. So the walls are actually all different shades of bluish purple. So the floor is a different color to the left wall is a different color from the right wall, and then vice versa. So there's the 4 different walls are all different colors, as well as the floor, and then the blue structure itself. When you're in there, it takes a minute to even realize, unless you're looking really closely, that exists. And that's also part of it as well. So it's just, you know, like really asking you to be present, and really, I think, kind of requires a level of commitment and time within the space. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's really beautiful to be in there. Like, I don't know, I remember the first time I walked in, it was just like my sensation changed immediately, like walking into the space. It definitely feels like really immersive. We are at time, but I think it's okay if we run a few minutes past. If anybody has any questions anymore, I think we got to all the questions that came up during the presentation, but if anyone has any more questions, please feel welcome to drop them in the chat window in the Zoom, or ask them live. Turn on your camera, unmute yourselves, say hello. Angelica, it looks like, raised her hand. I don't know if that was on purpose, but you're welcome to chime in if you have a question.
Thank you. Thanks, you guys. Also, hi from Red Hook.
Hi.
Hi, Angie.
My camera on right now. I like right before the talk started, I came back from a run, so I'm not looking my best. But okay, so my question is a little bit, it's about process. And I hope it's okay that I share this, Geo, but I know that this isn't your first time translating the No Rothko poem. I know that you created a piece for it originally that was actually just, it was a painting essentially, and I think like it was not, it's not what the, like this iteration is now, obviously. And so I'm curious, like, you know, given the sort of rules that you and Martin set up for yourself, where you kind of like, you don't talk to each other about the meaning of the poem before the work gets made, and that conversation happens after. I'm wondering how that dynamic worked for this particular iteration of No Rothko, and maybe how you began to sort of like step out of thinking about this less in 2-dimensional terms and more in 3-dimensional terms.
Yeah. So I think maybe like a year prior to coming up with this iteration, I had created a painting. So I was creating, in this process of thinking about the poem being more about Roscoe, I was making paintings that were kind of Roscoe-esque, if you will. And so, yeah, it was just a part of the process. I think it was more of kind of sitting with the work I needed to create work. I mean, I'm a visual artist, and so the way that I kind of to dissect and research is just through also making and through the process. And I can't remember because it's been so long ago, but I feel like Martin and I really dived into talking about it once it came to this state more than anything, because I think that the painting was more in development or process mode, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I remember that painting. That was shown at Art Center, right? I think. And yeah. I think I remember you saying like, "Oh, I've done this." I was like, "Oh, cool." but I don't think we then did the deep
we didn't
dive
really
into
talk about it. Yeah.
Until this one. Yeah.
It was definitely like beginning stages of this poem, or me kind of, you know, translating the poem to the next step.
Uh-huh.
And there's a few,
I remember at some point it's
yeah. Well, there's a few different iterations of the same poem as well. So like even in the presentation, like the very first one that I did, which is called How to Lean Forward. And that one I did also at Art Center first. And then I redid in Berlin, which is this version, this is the second version of that same poem. That's utilizing some of the same elements that were in the first one. But yeah, so I think that has been happening throughout all of them. And it connects to the fact that, like, you know, even within Martin's poem, if someone were today to leave a comment within the tutorials, you know, that can be taken into consideration to reshape it as well. So it's like, there's never an ending, I guess. There's never beginning or end with this process until maybe either one of us feels like we're done. Yeah.
Kind of in that vein, I really love kind of the language escalates when you're thinking of translation and then infiltration and then manipulation. Like, those are not gentle terms, right? Those are very powerful interventions. And I think that when we're working in the space of poetry and art, you know, and like in your video, music and dance, like these can be very like aesthetically like beautiful seeming concepts, but I don't want the kind of radicalness to get lost, because these interventions, you know, and thinking of them as infiltrations and manipulations, like that's you know, that's deliberate. Those are deliberate choices, and it's very powerful to conceptualize this work that way.
Yeah, totally, I agree, definitely. You know, and then I think both mine and Martin's work, even outside of this project, does that as well, both together and separately.
I'm going to look up I love a bit of etymology. If you look up the etymology of manipulation, I think it's pretty good.
That's
manipulation.
Yeah.
Etymology. I did this a few weeks ago for another project, but yeah, I think I think it's true. Like, manipulation is, like, I think, true to both of our works. Here you go. So manipulation comes from the 1730s, and it's about digging ore. So it's about kind of like, it comes from like this idea of a handful, and like this idea of digging by hand, digging ore out of the ground. So that's like the original roots of manipulation. And I think that's true to both of our works, right? This idea of like, we're like constantly like digging through, like trying to find what's behind this thing, or what's the infrastructure here, what's the kind of meaning here. And I love this idea of like, yeah, like obviously concepts and ideas and theories are good, but you can get a little bit lost in the ether. And I like this. I think there's something quite nice about words like manipulation and infiltration, because they have this tangible kind of real world sense to them, which I think is, and you look at Geo's work, it's not like stuff like it's stuck on a wall and you can't touch it. It's you can walk on it, you can climb on it, you can sit on it, you can read poetry from it, you can dangle from it. And I think I like this physicality, this kind of this kind of like this tactility about the work.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and I think it comes back to you know, the physical labor of the construction of it too, right? And I think that's why I'm so struck to see those images of like women at work, right, with tools and fire and material, and it is very hands-on, and it's and not unlike the poetry where you're inviting people to sculpt it essentially, right? Like editing, you can kind of relate to sculpture. Like, here's this big mass, and what do we whittle away, and what stays and what goes, and
I kind of like the poetry that actually gets quite messy, because like, this is like a bit of a shit show, right? You've just got like all of these comments, and then you've got like some people like done these little deletions, and so there is, I like this kind of scrappy, like handmade feel to this as well.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So we are over time. I just want to give a little bit of space. If anybody has any last questions, by all means, feel free to drop them in the chat window, or just unmute yourselves and say hi. Giovanna and Martin, I don't know if you also had any last thoughts before we close out and say goodbye.
I'm good. That was super fun.
For sure. I'm happy to answer any questions, so if people have.
Awesome. Okay. Any last questions from anyone? Give people a little time. All right. I think we're good. Well, thank you both so much for your generosity in sharing your work. I think that your collaboration is so interesting and clearly has been so fruitful for such a long time. I just wanted to point to this comment in the chat that came up earlier, kind of like Rothko and Johnson did back and forth over the chapel. And I think that comment came when you talked about how arguing was part of the process for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you for your generosity in sharing your work. And Giovanna, we've been so thrilled to work with you and to be able to share your vision.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, with everyone at Locust Projects. And as I mentioned before, if you haven't had a chance to see the show yet, it is up until 5 o'clock today. We're very, very sad to see it go, but have been, it's been a really fun, fruitful ride to collaborate with you.
Definitely. I appreciate it. Thank you everybody for joining us on Saturday for this talk as well. And thank you, Locust, again for the opportunity and also being down for the ride.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Thanks for coming out. Really fun.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Ciao.